In this episode of Dark Winter Nights, True Stories from Alaska,
there we are, staring at a 6-foot mammoth tusk, root to tip.
Jamy May Wagner devises a plan to remove a mammoth tusk from the side of a riverbank, and Matthew Sturm tries to figure out how to get a catatonic man down a mountain before the altitude kills him.
And we looked at a man who was never going to go down and would have to be wrestled all the way down thousands of feet to our camp. And we realized we had no choice. The only thing we could do was get him up and then get him down as fast as we could.
Extricated, up next on Dark Winter Nights, True Stories from Alaska. I'm Rob Prince. Because life in Alaska is very different from anywhere else in the United States, Alaskans have to have some laws that they don't generally worry about in the other states. For example, there literally are rules about what you must do if you find a woolly mammoth tusk on public land, if you can believe that. Jamy May Wagner got some legal schooling on that little section of law when she and her companions found a huge mammoth tusk sticking out of a riverbank. She shared this story at our November 2024 sold-out live event in Fairbanks. Here's Jamy.
My entry into this very old story started just a few years ago in 2019, July of 2019. And that summer, my husband and I had just moved back from Texas after a couple of years of traumatic events leading up to my mother's passing that April in 2019. So we were finally back in our little off-grid cabin in the woods of Denali Borough. And while we were gone, our buddy Bobby had become quite an avid rafter. And he calls, one day and says, "Hey, y'all want to go rafting this weekend?" And we had never been rafting, and we needed nature therapy like nobody's business, and we needed some good old Alaska outdoor time. So, of course, we were in. Well, the plan was to raft about 30 river miles from Healy, Alaska, to the Rex Bridge. For those of you who don't know, that is the big green bridge to the interior around mile 276 of the Parks Highway. And so we do. We drop in there in Healy near GVEA, and we begin our float. And we're floating on, and we come to this section of these really beautiful rock and sand formations. And so Bobby adjusts the raft so that we're floating sideways and all looking forward. I discovered I like hanging my legs over the front of the raft and just holding onto the rope. And we're just looking at these incredible features and ooh and ah and we come around, we finish kind of seeing these formations, we come around a curve in the river, and there's a rocky ravine there, and it's not very wide, really, but quite tall. And we all grow silent for a couple of seconds. And, I'm sitting in the front, and we start to mutter, was that a freaking mammoth tusk? And I don't know. I mean, maybe. Oh, Bobby, get over. So, like a madman, he starts rowing, trying to get over to the right-hand side of the river. But by the time he can actually get there, there's these very tall embankments and steep, and there was just really nowhere to land the boat. So we keep floating. This is very early. We have several hours left, and there's this banter, of course, going on, right? Is it even possible that was actually a mammoth tusk? I mean, come on, that had to have been a petrified log or something all twisted up. Why would we have been the first to see it anyway? Surely people raft this. And Bobby says, this is a pretty tame section of river. Most people kind of want some rapids, and we're just floating. And then we contemplate the fact that summer, there had been a lot of rain. It was a record rain year, and there had been quite a number of earthquakes take place in the interior. And I don't know, maybe that could have unearthed this thing. So anyway, it kind of fades into quiet contemplation. And I'm sure Bobby's back there rowing, thinking, if that's a tusk, we're going to be billionaires. And my husband, Dale is his name, the ever optimist, thinking, No way in hell. That's a mammoth tusk, right? And me up front, my hippy dippy spiritual nature thinking, oh, is it possible that that was my answer, the answer to my healing that I needed? And telling me that we're in the right place at the right time. This is just how things had to be. And so we finish that trip and we get out at the Rex Bridge and we pull the boat up and we all look at one another. We got to go back. We got to go back now. And so we adjust the vehicles, of course, so that we can get the raft back where it needs to be in Healy. And in the meantime, we devise a new plan for exit out of the river. And we decide that we could cut the trip in half, still see this thing that we think's a tusk, and get out sooner. At a little place called Ferry, Alaska, in Denali Borough, made famous by their annual 4th of July mooning of the passenger trains. And excellent, beautiful beachy spot, and be a great place to get out of the river. So we drop back in at GVEA. We start floating. We pass Usabella. We pass these formations. Ooh, ah. We're about to come around that curve. And so Bobby, boy, like a master, right? He's rowing to get us over to that rocky ravine in time. And he does. And we pull up there, and I slip off the front with the anchor rope, and I give it a tug. And I got to tell you, I'm barely even sure that boat's actually out of the water before I'm hightailing it up that ravine, because I can't wait to see what this thing is. And of course, a couple seconds later, the guys are behind me. And there we are, staring at a 6-foot mammoth tusk, root to tip. I let my hand just run all the way down this thing, and I get to the root, and I kind of try to give it a lift, and that damn thing is heavy. So, there's just no question. That thing's going with us. We start picking up shards and stuffing them in our pocket, and we get the tusk down to the raft and get it in, and then we think, so by this point, by the way, it's about midnight, okay? And we think, well, we wouldn't want all these people on the river or there in Ferry to see our treasure. So what do any good Alaskans do? We covered it with a blue tarp. We didn't bother to strap it in, which becomes important later, but we did have it covered. So off we go, right? We head down the river, floating to Ferry. Now, when you're passing through Ferry as a checkpoint and just floating through, it really doesn't seem to be any significant changes in the water. But what we noticed as we needed to get left and out at Ferry was that all of a sudden that water really does pick up a pace. And that pace is headed directly for the concrete column that holds up the railroad. Few seconds notice, Bobby says, brace yourselves. And we do. We brace ourselves, and bam, we slam into that concrete column, and it sort of bounces us off, and we're sort of in the middle there. And all these things, of course, happen so quickly. Within seconds, decisions have to be made. And you can see that it's sort of shallow there in the center of the Nenana River, but it's not over to the left. It's deep. So at the last second, my husband jumps out of the raft into the Nenana River in his flip-flops. All right, so he's holding on to the raft, and I'm dumbfounded and just, wow, we just hit that thing. And, anyway, so I listened to them devise a plan to get us where we need to be. And I hear that my husband is going to both push and leap into the raft. Bobby's going to row, and we're going to get over there. And I'm thinking, I have to do something to help out with this. So I think, okay, well, if that does happen the way they've said, that's going to kind of swing me around to a rocky spot that's right there on the edge. And I think, well, okay, I can just jump off and plant us there. And so it happens. He pushes. Now, let me say something real quick here. My husband is big and strong and tall, but he is not agile. So I'm thinking about this push, leap, and flip-flop thing all happening. But anyway, it's okay. So he does. He pushes, he leaps, we swing around, Bobby's rowing, and it puts me over there by the rocks. So I slide off, and I plant my best asset right there on the rocks, rope around my waist, and I hold on for dear life. And a few seconds into this, we're stopped. They realize we're stopped. So quickly, my husband gets on his real shoes. He jumps out, and we spend about the next hour working our way through the back downstream, through the brush to get back to the spot where we actually needed to be. Mosquitoes, of course, at this point, it's about 2 in the morning, and they're like, yes, fresh, hot blood. It was nutty. Anyway, we get there. We pull the boat out. The 3 of us are safe, and there's our treasure still in the raft. And so we load that thing up, and we go to our cabins, and it's about 4 in the morning by the time we get home, and adrenaline pumping, and we take a little nap, and then I wake up the next morning, and I think, I wonder if we should have taken that thing out of its, natural habitat. I don't know. It's not like going hunting and you check the regs or whatever, so I didn't know the rules. Well, let me tell you what. From the moment we put that tusk in the raft, we were the mammoth tusk outlaws of Denali Borough. But here's the deal. We make terrible criminals. What was the first thing I did? I call the state. After being transferred 2 or 3 times, I say, to some guy who maybe knows, hypothetically, if, some folks were out rafting a river in Alaska and they came across a mammoth tusk, what should they do with that thing? And he says, well, hypothetically, ma'am, they should follow the law, and the law is that if it's on private lands and you own those lands or you have permission, then it's yours to keep. However, if it's on preserved lands, of course, or if it's on state land, which is most of the edges of the river in Alaska, you should leave it alone. I said, well, thank you, sir. You have a great day. And so we at that point were misdemeanor criminals. But if we tried to sell it and get the $1 billion Bobby wanted for it, we were going to be felons. And we all quickly decided we were all way too pretty to go to prison. So we didn't do that. Instead, it found its home in our back room, kind of a little Arctic entry at the back of our cabin where it was dark and cool, and we thought would preserve that tusk for a while. And Bobby would come over and see it, and of course, we all had shards. And we told anyone who would listen, again, terrible criminals. I took it to Tatlanika gift shop. In my van, I opened the door, and I'm like showing it to people, telling everybody. Well, fast forward from that summer to Christmas of 2020. That was a Christmas where it snowed and snowed and snowed. And we had made about 200 tamales for Christmas and 250 sugar cookies. And it snowed so much that only a couple of people were even able to stop by. And then overnight, it started to rain. And it rained and it rained and it rained. Well, we wake up the morning after Christmas to drip, drip, drip. We've all been there. I'm like, oh, so I run to the back room, and you know it, right? The drip's happening right down the center of that mammoth tusk. So we rush to get that thing out of there, and it comes up to our main part of our cabin and becomes the Christmas centerpiece under our dining room table, and all these tamales and cookies and our battery-operated Christmas lights. And it was just a lovely thing, but we did notice something once we had it up there in the light for a while. We noticed it was really changing, and it was getting darker and starting to splinter a bit more. And so we decided it was time for that tusk to find a really good home. So we made some inquiries, and it turned out that the Museum of the North was very interested in it. I mean, they have other tusks, of course, but very few that are actually full root to tip. Almost none that they know the exact GPS coordinates of where it was found. So, hey, they wanted it. And then just a little time coincidentally after that, they began their Adopt a Mammoth program that is still going on today. Any of you can do it. And for $350, you can adopt a piece of mammoth that they have so that it can get radiocarbon dated. Well, we did that. We adopted our tusk, and we just recently found out that tusk is over 50,000 years old. I tell you what, I still can't believe it. I think of all the things that had to happen, right? My mother's timing of her passing, our coming back from Texas, our buddy becoming a rafter, the torrential rains, the earth had to shake, for goodness sakes, for us three goofballs to find that beautiful ancient piece of our Earth's history. So there you go. It's the Denali Burrow Mammoth Tusk Outlaws. Thank you very much.
Jamy May Wagner. She shared that story at our November 2024 live event in Fairbanks. This is Dark Winter Nights, True Stories from Alaska, the Extricated episode. I'm Rob Prince. As kids, we're often taught never to be quitters. Stick with what you've started and don't give up. Generally in life, that's pretty good advice. But in Alaska, not knowing when to quit is a great way to get yourself into a giant heap of trouble. Matthew Sturm experienced this when one of his mountain climbing buddies insisted that he would summit the mountain or die, or both. He shared this story at our March 2025 sold-out live event in Fairbanks. Here's Matthew.
So this story tonight's going to be about Mount Sanford, but it's also going to be about a friend named Jurgen, and Jurgen's passed on. So in some ways, in my mind, Sanford and Jurgen are connected. And when I see Mount Sanford, I get to think about that departed friend. I'm sure many of you have a departed friend you like to think about. So the story is called Getting Too High. And Jurgen had been on an expedition to Mount Sanford before I met him. And they'd gotten very high on the mountain. I wasn't on that trip. When one of the guys got pulmonary edema. Now, pulmonary edema, it's a strange disease, high-altitude disease. What happens is water starts to collect on your lungs, and you can't breathe. And if you don't go down, you die. There's a second edema called cerebral edema. That's where the water collects on your brain, and then you get you can't walk, you're dizzy, you can't talk. So the edemas are really pretty severe. So this fellow got pulmonary edema, and they had to go down, but they were very close to the summit at the time. So I'm sure that Jurgen had a vendetta with the mountain, because the bottom line is in mountain climbing to say, well, we got close to the summit just doesn't cut it. You have to say we summited, right? So they went down, and Jurgen had this vendetta. So when he heard that John and I were planning our trip to Mount Sanford, he wanted in. We were already friends then, and so we were delighted to have him. But I first need to tell you a little bit about this guy, Jurgen. So Jurgen, he was German, but he'd been raised in Switzerland most of his life, and he studied geophysics and then volcanoes. We worked at the same place. I was a grad student at the time at the Geophysical Institute, and he was a volcanologist there. But that's not actually where I met him. Where I met him was on the slopes of ski land, because as you might imagine, someone who basically had grown up in Switzerland is more at home on their skis than they are on their feet. And he was an exquisite skier. At ski land, I would watch him carve beautiful S-turns down the slopes while I would sort of swoosh and fall on my butt. So we met kind of through skiing and stuff, and a little bit at work. So we had three of us, and we decided it would be a lot better if we had four people to climb the mountain. So we got our friend Phil to join. We'd done some climbing before, and we began to plan and prepare for the expedition. We bought a tent. We started to buy food. Roman Dial, many of you will have heard of him as a friend of mine and John's. So Roman told us we had to have a pressure cooker. Well, we didn't know anything about it, but okay, we'll get a pressure cooker for high altitude. I don't know why, but a premonition, we brought a little orange kid's plastic sled. Brought that along. Lastly, we did some research on the mountain, and we'd heard, sadly, that two Japanese climbers had passed away in a year or two before us, and we're still up there. So we made a pact to stay away from the east side where we thought they were. We sure didn't want to bump into them. So finally the day came. It was early March, just like now. Beautiful sun, but very, very cold to fly in. Ken Bunch from the Gakona airstrip flew in the first two guys. I went on the second load, and I'll never forget that. They are down on the Sheep Creek Glacier. You could see the ski marks from the plane. They looked like two little, equal sign. And then two little dots. Those were my companions. And towering above them, this vast white cone. It really gave you a sense of scale. Plane landed. I got out. We got the rest of the gear. Ken took off, and we were on our own. So we put on our skis, put on our skins, roped up, and started up the glacier. And to be honest, over the first couple of days, there was no adventure at all. We worked our way up in and around crevasses and did our thing. A few more days went by as we got up the mountain, and we finally got up to 13,000 feet. Now, at 13,000 feet, you're exposed to everything there. There's no shelter. So we looked around, and we found a crevasse with a solid floor, and we pitched our tent down in there to at least have some shelter from the wind. But it meant the tent would be hard to find. And we went to bed. We knew if the next day was going to dawn with good weather, it would be our summit day. I don't know about the others. I didn't get much sleep that night in anticipation. But at 4 a.m. the next morning, poked our heads out, and sure enough, we could see one or two stars. That meant it was on. We were headed for the summit. So headlights on, we left the skis behind there, put our crampons on, and started up that steeper part of the mountain. Now, at 4 a.m. on a very cold morning, as you're walking into the dawn, nobody says too much. But normally, Jürgen was pretty chatty, and we'd heard nothing from him. He was very silent. No alarm bells went off right then. But as it got lighter, I think I noticed, and I'm pretty sure both John and Phil noticed, that he was staggering a little bit. Well, we sort of said in our own minds, yeah, it's high altitude, hard work. Maybe he's having a little bit of trouble. So we pulled in the ropes between a few crevasses and asked everybody okay, and Jürgen kind of gave us a little nod. So, okay, off we went again. This time the staggers were starting to look a little more like a zombie walk. And I think all of us, at least me, John, and Phil, started to know something was wrong. We tried to go for a few more hours, and we were getting pretty high up, getting fairly close to the summit, but something was definitely wrong. The thing is, because there had been pulmonary edema on that first climb of Jürgen, all of us had studied the symptoms, and we knew that Jürgen was starting to suffer from cerebral edema. We pulled in the ropes, pulled in Jürgen, and we said, Jürgen, you've got cerebral edema. We've got to go down. We've got to. And that man just said, up. He said, no, you've got to go down. It's really important. He said, up again. We looked up. There are maybe a few hundred feet more, 400 feet more to the summit. We looked down. We looked at that pitifully small yellow, orange plastic sled, and we looked at a man who was never going to go down and would have to be wrestled all the way down thousands of feet to our camp, and we realized we had no choice. The only thing we could do is get him up and then get him down as fast as we could. Phil put him on a short rope. That means, just about 10 feet between Phil and Jürgen, and we kept going upward. The staggers turned into the zombie and then the Frankenstein walk, but that man kept going. And eventually we did. We got to the summit. Now, the summit of Sanford it's a crater on a volcano, but it's filled with ice and snow, so it's big and flat. For one brief moment, it was grand, and then it dawned on us where we were and how sick our companion was, and that we better get down. If going up was hard enough, going down with a staggering man was even harder, and by the time we got off the summit cone, it was already getting late and twilight was setting in. And we had a tent somewhere down on the mountain, hidden in a crevasse. We had one more really critical decision to make, and one person was going to take it in the shorts for that decision. John, Phil, and I got together, and we said, Phil, who really was the hard man of our expedition, you're going to have to short rope Jürgen down while we head for that tent just as fast as we can, and then we'll turn around after we've marked it and come back. So John and I raced down to the tent, and we managed to get there and find it before it got too dark. There we pulled a Coleman lantern, a one burner, out of the tent and fired it up, mounted it on two skis, and raced back up. By now it was pitch black, of course, but by the time we found Phil, he was white as a ghost, and all he could say was, Jürgen kept trying to walk into crevasses. It was midnight by the time all of us got down to the tent. We snuggled Jürgen into a sleeping bag. I honestly thought he'd be dead in the morning, personally. I don't know what the others thought. And we all tried to get a little sleep. The next morning was a perfect day, and Jürgen was his old self, chattering and talking and looking forward to the 7,000-foot powder run that was ahead of us. He was looking for it so nicely that he turned and he said, Jan, I am so weak. Please, you'll have to take my pack. Jan was having none of that. And so we packed the tent, and off we went, linking S turns, Jürgen in his exquisite manner, skiing 7,000 feet down that mountain. It was a day in 1,000. It was wonderful. At the bottom of the glacier, we picked up what remaining food cache we had, and we had a 20-mile ski out. That took us 2 days. We got out to the highway between Mantasta and Glen Allen, just ahead of a pickup truck driven by a preacher's wife. She saw the skis and packs and everything and thought there'd been a car accident, so she slowed and then stopped, which was her mistake, because we threw everything we had in the back of that pickup and jumped in. She had no choice but to drive us to her house at Chistochina, cook us up some soup, and thankfully her husband prayed over us. And then he took us to Glen Allen, where our vehicles were. Every time I go by Mount Sanford, I think of Jürgen, and I still miss him. Mount Sanford's a great memorial for him, so I like to see it. And the one thing I think about there, when I look at that mountain, is Jürgen skiing down that mountain with exquisite S turns, the danger behind him, and a smile on his face. Thank you.
Matthew Sturm. He shared that story at our March 2025 live event in Fairbanks. Thanks so much for listening to this edition of Dark Winter Nights, True Stories from Alaska, the Extricated episode. Today's episode was edited by myself, Rob Prince. Story consultation by Lori Neufeld. Remember, these are the stories we tell up here in Alaska on Dark Winter Nights. I'm Rob Prince.